Hi guys, Jessica here from the Healing Hands Duo, and I actually just wanted to do a quick video here on Instagram, and I just wanted to respond to a few comments that I got on last night's video about how to ferment vegetables. So the first one actually comes from Miles, and Miles and I go way back. And the first thing that he had mentioned here is he wanted to know if it was okay to eat fermented vegetables in an active flare. And the reason why he would ask is because in the past I have told him to kind of stay away from eating any uncooked vegetables and make sure that you were eating vegetables that were either boiled or mushy. And if you're in an active flare and you have Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, that still stands true for me. Personally, when I was struggling with any flare, I couldn't eat any raw vegetables. And the reason for that is because I had a very difficult time digesting anti-nutrients, as many of us do. Even people with perfect gut health will have some issues with anti-nutrients. They just won't struggle with it as much. However, if you do have any type of gut damage, then this is going to be a problem for you, which means you have to learn how to prepare vegetables, some fruits and some vegetables and nuts and seeds and all that properly in order to eliminate some of these anti-nutrients. In some cases, anti-nutrients are actually in fact very good for some people, and they have been shown to, in minuscule amounts, have been shown to actually increase and boost the immune system. But this may work against you in the case of having an autoimmune disease. So what I would say there is that there are a few different things that you need to learn how to do in order to prepare your food properly in order to reduce these anti-nutrients. And unfortunately, there have been studies to show that even if you do some of these particular things like soaking and sprouting and fermenting and all that, when you do that to grains, particularly things like wheat, unfortunately, there have been some studies to show that these anti-nutrients are not reduced. And of course, you got things like gluten, and that can damage the gut as well. So grains, I obviously have not been eating grains for many years. I did, in the beginning, I did a healing diet, which was kind of a combination. I did do the STD diet very strictly for about 2 or 3 years. And then I kind of incorporated stuff from the body ecology diet as well as the GAPS diet. In all three of those diets, there's a common denominator between all three of them. And the one thing that they ask you and they tell you that you need to do is to incorporate fermented foods, which is why I started eating them. So to answer your question, Miles, do I think you can eat them in a flare? Yes, but I think you need to be very, very careful. However, with my last recent kind of episode that I was able to get myself out of fairly quickly doing my actual protocol that I had mentioned on our YouTube channel, that is, I would of course do all those steps, but I did incorporate digestive enzymes, a little bit of apple cider vinegar, and I incorporated fermented vegetables with each of my meals. However, I'm very seasoned to eating fermented vegetables, so this can be very tough on some people, and I would recommend taking it very slowly. And by slowly, I'm literally talking about probably doing less than a teaspoon of fermented vegetables, if you can even handle that. I would say that that's actually going to be even too much for some people in a flare. So what it's recommended, and Dr. Marcola talks about this on his website, is actually even some people might be so susceptible to having die-off because their gut is so full of candida or parasites or bacteria or whatnot, or they just have such an extreme dysbiosis of the gut. So you want to try to avoid having any ill effects by starting the fermented vegetables. However, ill effects could mean, gas and bloating and, slight bit of constipation or something along those lines. Or you can have really watery stools, and that might be a problem with people with UC or Crohn's disease, because that's an issue for us already. Or you can have, for me, I remember when I incorporated fermented foods, probably almost 11 years ago now, I would say. I had a lot of die-off that even looked like it was like a dark, tarry, black kind of stool. And of course, all this stuff is, when you're going through all of this, a lot of this stuff is very foul smelling. So that's another thing. However, this is not necessarily a bad thing. You just kind of want to avoid having any, like I said before, ill side effects from incorporating fermented foods into your diet. So what I would say is, if you've never tried them before and you're taking a probiotic, this is another misconception people have about probiotics. I have said in the past that people should incorporate probiotics in the beginning, because they're going to be easier on your digestive system. And then there is a company called GI Pro Health that I did start off with, and it was just it's a very basic probiotic, and it only contains Lactobacillus acidophilus. And I still believe you should start there, but I do believe you should try to incorporate fermented foods fairly early on too, like some of these healing diets. Like the SCD diet is really big on the yogurt, which was a problem for me because I not only had lactose intolerance and had problems with lactose, I was also casein intolerant. So I had to eliminate dairy, and I didn't do that on that diet for years. And I think that was a big downfall for me. So that's one thing. The yogurt didn't work out very well for me until I started fermenting my own yogurt, and I started using either almond milk or coconut milk. And I have reservations about drinking too much almond milk now, or eating too much almond butter, or eating any nuts for that matter. And the reason for that is these anti-nutrients. So I would probably say coconut milk is probably a better bet. However, on the SCD diet, it is recommended that you kind of stay away from coconut milk because it can cause more diarrhea. And I think it's about into the 6th month mark that you can start incorporating it into the diet. So that was kind of an issue for me. So I kind of wasn't doing that as much as I guess I should have been doing when I first started that diet many, many years ago. I don't necessarily do these diets now. I do bits and pieces of all of them, of course, when I'm having issues, but I kind of eat more towards, and I've said this before on our channel, an epi-paleo diet, which means taking not into only consideration your nutrition, but that your environment will drive your nutrition. So a lot of the things that I do it revolves around light, eliminating blue light toxicity, non-native EMFs, is eating to your seasons and making sure that you're eating the appropriate foods based on what seasons it is. So I will eat more fruits and vegetables in the summer seasons when those things are readily available to me. And then in the winter months, I will eat more animal-based foods and from fats in order to obviously conserve energy and for heat production and stuff like that. So I'm not going to get too much into that. We've done plenty of videos on that stuff already. Most of this is just about answering your question. And I think the reason why I wanted to mention this is because I did put a warning on this last video. Because again, you're going to be wanting to incorporate fermented foods if you are struggling with any health issue, really, because strengthening the immune system, you're going to be strengthening the gut-brain axis. So the thing is, if you're having mental issues, like if there's a child that's struggling with autism, you're struggling with depression, anxiety, you have bloating, gas, indigestion, problems with the stomach, problems with diarrhea, problems with constipation, autoimmune diseases, cancers, everything really, it's actually going to balance the immune system. I guess that's a better word for it. It's going to also balance your microbiome, which is very important because as I said on the video, 70 to 80% of all immune tissue resides in your gut. To start off, if you're going to make this particular batch that I had mentioned, and Bill actually asked me a few questions too, because he had said that he was making his ferments differently. He wasn't grinding them up quite as small as I was doing in the video. The reason why we do that is because, again, fiber is an issue for people with gut diseases. So I felt that grinding it up, and it is recommended by Dr. Marcola, he kind of does it like a sauerkraut. He grinds it up, and I think the reason for that is so that you're getting these bacteria fully integrated and inoculated into the vegetables, so it's helping to break down and digest as much fiber as possible. That's another question that Miles had asked me. He said that wasn't this going to be an issue because of the fact that we shouldn't eat raw vegetables? Well, when you process vegetables, even if they're raw, for instance, like nuts and seeds, if you soak and sprout them, you're changing the molecular structure of that particular food. And then you're actually putting that food into a pre-digested state. So fermenting does the same thing for vegetables. So if you ferment fruits or vegetables, then what you're doing is you're creating a pre-digested food, which means it's going to take that energy away from you having to digest that particular food. So it's also going to reduce some of the starches and the sugars that can cause issues. Then it's also going to pre-digest the fibers, and it's going to obviously reduce some of the anti-nutrients, which is why all of us have issues with eating raw vegetables, which is, not all of us, but those of us with gut diseases. So by doing this, you're actually processing the vegetables and they're no longer considered necessarily raw, even though they technically are. This is called lactofermentation, I believe it's what they call it, which means that you're increasing the bacterial count on the actual fermented vegetable, which that is a great thing. Another thing was somebody had said to me, and I think it was Bill that mentioned that he was using a whey supplement or a whey powder to ferment from a previous kefir that he was making, or kefir, however you pronounce that. You can ferment vegetables so many different ways. The only reason why I choose to ferment my vegetables this way is because years ago, Kevin and I tried to ferment wild ferments, and we used to use things like wild kefir grains, and we were trying to use things like probiotics, right? The problem that we were having with that, especially with the wild grains, is that it is very difficult to control that ferment, and whatever is on the vegetable and based on whatever starter you're using, there's a good chance that you could potentially ferment bad bacteria or invasive yeasts. And this is another problem. A lot of people are drinking kombucha and, these fermented beers and all that stuff. And the thing with people who have Crohn's disease, there has been a particular genetic marker in us that we have known to react very badly to certain types of yeast. So I personally do not drink beer, even if it's a craft beer. And I personally do not drink kombucha either, because I think I've had problems in the past with things like SIBO and of course the Crohn's. I tried making kefir, coconut kefir water from wild grains, and it actually made me a lot worse than ever trying fermented vegetables through a culture starter. And the other thing that I noticed with that is I actually developed yeast infections from it. So if you are also struggling with candida, which a lot of people with gut issues are, and candida is basically just systemic yeast throughout the body, drinking or fermenting yeast and eating yeast could potentially make your yeast infections worse. So I wouldn't really recommend it. There are a few yeasts that have been shown to be non-invasive to the body and actually very healing to the gut, one of them being Saccharomyces boulardii. However, again, that would be entirely up to you whether you wanted to try that in a probiotic form. I don't really recommend people who are struggling with autoimmune diseases or Lyme disease or anything like that. I don't really recommend that you guys go ahead and start doing a bunch of wild ferments, just because at this point, all you're trying to do is re-inoculate the gut with good bacteria. Okay guys, I'm not exactly sure where the last video kind of cut off. I had tried to actually upload the second part of that video 3 or 4 times yesterday when I did the first part of this video, and unfortunately it kept deleting from my phone because I'm having major issues with it. Nonetheless, just to kind of wrap this up really quickly, I didn't want to leave it there. Going back to a few of the things that Miles had said about starting off on fermented foods very, very slowly. So when you make this particular batch of fermented foods using this particular culture starter. The other reason why I do use a controlled cultured starter is because Dr. Marcolos has been one of the only ones that I could find that will also yield vitamin K2. I don't want to get into all the extensive details about the benefits of taking consuming vitamin K2, but a lot of it has to do with the way that you assimilate vitamin D and for bone health. So that was something that was very important to me as well. Doing a controlled culture starter is going to ensure that you're inoculating yourself with healthy bacteria, and then it's going to also eliminate some of the possibilities of fermenting, particular types of molds, yeast, and bad bacteria. So that's why we don't do that. Kevin and I did try to do some ferments using wild fermented kefir grains many years ago. It didn't go very well for us. Actually, Kevin did experience some rashes and stuff like that, and I actually developed more yeast, so we kind of learned that the hard way. However, that's not to say that that's wrong and that might not work for you. So this is just the way that we've done it, and this was the easiest way that I found to ferment using these controlled starters, because number one, it's going to cut down your ferment times. In the summer months, you can have a fermented food within approximately, based on the temperature of your home, if you keep it in a slightly room temperature warmer area out of direct sunlight, you could probably have a ferment within approximately 3 to 4 days. If it's a little bit cooler in your home or in the winter months, it may be up to 7 days, whereas other ferments can take like weeks. So that's another reason why we do it, because we want to have cultured vegetables on a regular basis. The other thing is, if you are starting these out for the very first time, or you're giving them to your children for the very first time, I want people to understand that taking like a tablespoon of this stuff is inoculating your gut with trillions of good bacteria, not just billions like you would get in a probiotic. So you do need to take it very slowly, and by slowly, when you open up the ferment, you'll notice that the brine comes to the top, and that's necessary to have it at the top because you want to make sure that the cultured vegetables stay below that brine in order to prevent any type of decay or rot. So you want to keep it below that. But what you want to do for the first couple of days, just to kind of test it out on yourself, is to maybe just take out a little tiny bit of that brine and just have the actual liquid, which is the celery juice, for the first couple of days. And then you want to kind of monitor yourself for the next, say, 2 to 3 days, just to make sure that you're not having any ill side effects. If that's okay, then you can obviously progress on to taking like half a teaspoon with each of your, I'm sorry, I would start with half a teaspoon and then take that half a teaspoon with each of your meals, and then maybe work your way up to doing a tablespoon, up until the point where Kevin and I do like a small bowl now with each of our meals. So I really enjoy them, so that's why I don't mind eating cultured vegetables on a daily basis with each of my meals anyway. I think I'm gonna wrap it up there, or this video will be very long. I'll try to include the link somewhere on YouTube so that Bill and Miles, both of you guys, can see this. So again, I just wanna wish everybody a happy, healthy day, and I hope everybody is enjoying the day so far. Okay, perfect guys. Bye-bye.